Welcome back to the video. In this one I've got a bit of a fun one for you, and that is 50 sewing things that I no longer buy. So this is a type of video that does well in the decluttering niche, so I thought I'd bring it over here and we can have a little bit of fun. I feel that if this type of video was around when I first started sewing, it would have helped me to save a lot of money, because I didn't know what I was doing. I was buying anything and everything, as this video told you. So let's get into the list. So number one is zips or zippers. The main reason is I have got a big box full of zippers. I will probably never need to buy zips again. In fact, I may even declutter some of them. But apart from that, I don't tend to put zips in many clothes. I mainly would use it for coats, or if I was just making pouches or bags. Number two is marking tools. I have got more marking tools than I can count on my hand, whether it's the Crayola pens, whether it's pencils. I recently got some pencils from Merchant and Mills. I think I even got a Hera marker somewhere. I've got all sorts of markers. You can see them laid out now, and I am never going to need to buy them, not for a long time anyway. So number three is patterns not in my size range. So when I first started sewing, it was really difficult, in fact almost impossible, to find a pattern that was in my size, which was a size 22 to 24. It was very frustrating, very disheartening. But as time went on, more and more pressure was applied in the sewing community. Pattern companies do now offer larger sizes. So now there is no reason for me to ever buy a pattern that does not fit into my size range. You've seen me talk about this in this video here, where I feel very strongly that if a pattern company won't invest in me, i.e. they won't make patterns in my sizes, then I'm not going to invest in them. Number four is polyester fabric. So when I was first sewing, I would sew with any fabric. The cheaper, the better. I was sometimes buying fabric for £1 a metre, and it wasn't up to much. And often I'd make a garment, put it in the washing machine, and it would fall apart. Not to mention it just does not feel nice on my skin. These days I will not sew with polyester at all. I'm into sustainability, as we know. And also I want clothes that are breathable, that are comfortable to wear. I have a polyester dress in my wardrobe, and that is going to be retired soon, because whenever I wear it, I feel really weird. Number five is printer paper or ink. So always through my sewing journey, the whole 10 years, I've always printed off my patterns, A4, put them together and sewed them like that. Well, a couple months ago, just as I was getting back into sewing actually, my printer broke and I had to send off for A0 patterns, because the A0 patterns I had before, I decluttered thinking I was never going to use them again. Now I have to send off for a pattern if I want to make it. But what I'm actually finding is, because I'm having to send off, and that's costing money, not to mention having to wait for the pattern to come back, it's making me discern more closely the pattern that I want to make and making me consider it a lot more deeply. So number six is loud fabric. Whenever I look at fun fabrics on Instagram, I'm like, I want that fabric, I've got to have that fabric, without really thinking about what I want to make with it. So here you can see a few different fabrics that I've made in the past using some fun fabrics, but these days my tastes have changed. I still gravitate towards the loud fabrics, but I'm looking for a calmer aesthetic, a more grown-up aesthetic now. I like the plain fabrics now. Once upon a time, I would have thought that was a waste of money buying a plain fabric, but now I absolutely love them, especially in pastel colours. So number seven is single-use gadgets. So I didn't actually buy this. This was gifted to me. I won it in a giveaway. But this is a button holder. Put this on your garment and you can mark your buttons, but that's literally all it does. As far as I know, let me know if it does something else. So moving forward, I will not buy anything that only does one job, because honestly, in most of those cases, you can just use something else that you've already got. So for example, a loop turner, you can just use a safety pin. One of those button holders, you know, the ones that make the holes, you could just use your scissors or your seam ripper. I feel buying these handy dandy gadgets are fun at the time, but they really are a waste of time because most of the time we just don't use them. Number 8 is sewing machines. So throughout my journey of doing sewing, I have bought millions of sewing machines, not millions, but lots and lots. I've probably had about 10 to 15 sewing machines over the years. And then maybe 6 years ago, I got my current sewing machine. I'm very, very happy with it. It was a high-end one. Well, high-end for me. I will not be upgrading it or changing it in any way. I've got no need to. It works perfectly well. I hope that that machine is going to see me into old age, which isn't actually that far away. But leading on from that, number 9 is sergers. So I've had 3 sergers in my lifetime. The first one I had for about a week or 2 and it went back to the shop. Second one I had for about 3 years. And the third one is the one that I have now that I unboxed with you guys a couple of years ago, maybe about a year and a half ago. It's not particularly high end. It cost about £300, but the front opens up. So threading is super easy. I will do a video very soon on demystifying sergers, so do watch out for that. So number 10 is a cover stitch machine. A few years ago, I did own a cover stitch machine. I've done a couple of videos about it. It was a waste of money. I spent over £500 on it and I used it about 4 times. Honestly, I just never got used to that machine. And I felt in the end it was a lot of money for doing one stitch. So I did resell it. So number 11 is cam snaps. So a few years ago, when my button holder on my sewing machine wasn't working, I decided to get cam snaps and I was putting cam snaps on everything. I've got a whole box of cam snaps there and the pliers to put them on with. They do go on super, super easy. But I really think they should only be on something like a baby's garment. They're plastic and they're colourful, but they don't have any use in my aesthetic moving forward. Number 12 is Swedish tracing paper. Many, many years ago, a brand sent me some to try out. It's very expensive. It's like £20 a roll. You cannot argue with it. It is good. It's very good because not only can you draw your patterns onto it, it's semi-see-through, and you can sew it and try it on, so it works as a toile as well. But at £20 a metre, it's more expensive than some of the fabrics that I buy. So I won't ever be doing that. I would rather just use an old bed sheet or something like that. So number 13 is a magnetic seam gauge. So you put it on your sewing machine at the width of the seam allowance that you want, and then you glide your fabric through and it keeps your seam allowance steady. But what I found, I bought this when I was very first into sewing. It didn't really stay in place. It would always move. As soon as the fabric would go through, the fabric would nudge it out of its way. I would never buy one of those. Don't buy one of those, because you can just put a bit of washi tape onto your sewing machine where you want it and that will guide it. Or you could even put an elastic band around the free arm. The number 14 is sewing feet. So I've got more feet here than I know what I can do with. So when I was first into sewing and I was buying all the gadgets, I saw on Amazon that they had these packets of feet. I think it was like 15 feet for like £4 or something. So I bought them. But to be honest with you, most of them I have never used. And the feet that I do use are ones that I've bought individually. So number 15 is duck-billed scissors, but any scissors really. I've bought lots and lots over the years. When I started, I just used the household scissors. Soon realised that I couldn't use paper scissors on fabric. Don't ever do that. Have separate scissors for paper and fabric. So then I bought a cheap pair of dressmaker's scissors at the local supermarket. Then I upgraded to some Gingers. I had them for quite a while and I quite like them, although they were a little creaky, they needed oiling. Then I won a pair of high-end scissors, shears, serrated shears from Wright and Sons, I think they were. That was brilliant. So I've had them a few years, absolutely love them. They've become a bit patinaed, but they're very, very sharp and very heavy. So I don't see myself having any need to buy scissors anymore, and I have the duck billed scissors because that was one of my little whims that I thought, oh yeah, that's going to help with my sewing. It doesn't do anything that the other scissors don't do. I've also got lots of little snips. I went through a stage of buying cheap little snips and they went blunt really, really quickly. I did end up investing in a pair from Merchant and Mills that were only about £8, I think. And they've lasted me a couple of years at this point. So we're good. We're all scissor good. So number 16 is plastic headed pins. So I've bought a whole array of pins over the time. I've bought more expensive ones. I've bought the cheapest ones on the market and many in between. I recently just purchased some pins from Merchant and Mills without any head on them at all. Haven't used them yet, so we'll see how that goes. I'm not going to purchase the plastic ones for reasons that you know. I don't want to buy plastic if I can help it. I'm not perfect, but if I can help it, I don't want to. And also, the plastic headed ones melt under the iron and they go blunt really, really quickly. I just want to take a minute to say that even though I'm saying that I would never buy these things, doesn't mean that I'm telling you not to buy them. It's just what works for me. We all have individual needs, and what you need is going to be very different to me. And hopefully it just get you thinking about what you need and what you don't need. So number 17 is a dressmaker's dummy. Some years ago I did purchase one. I saw one in TK Maxx and I thought, oh yes, I'll get that. Another thing I just bought. And it never got used. It was more of a wardrobe than anything else. I just throw clothes on there and it would just get hidden in my craft room that I had at that point. When I moved here, I resold it and I haven't looked back. So number 18 is a chalk wheel pen. So I kind of did cover marking tools before, but this one in particular really annoys me. You know the one, it's by Clover. It's got a little wheel on it and you can go along your fabric and it leaves a line of chalk. But that chalk never stays. You do it, 2 minutes later it's completely gone. It just drives me mad. So I've still got it, but I would not buy it again. Number 9 is hem tape. So when I very first started, my very first garment, which was a jersey viscose, why on earth I bought that fabric, I don't know, because it had a life of its own. But I decided, because I couldn't hem it, I was really bad at sewing at this point, and the easiest way is going to be to use hem tape. But actually the whole garment was really flowy, almost like water, so fluid. But this hem was really stiff and it really stood out and it kind of ruined the garment. And so I never used hem tape since then. And I don't really see a need for it now. I'm more experienced. So number 20 is clear elastic. So the only time I've ever used clear elastic is when I made a dress by Colette. I forget the name of it, but I'll put it up here. And it has a gathered skirt and it requires you to use clear elastic. Now, I could not get the hang of it. I just couldn't. I couldn't stretch it. I'd do the right amount, but then it wouldn't stretch far enough. And then my sewing would waver off the edge. It was no good. I much preferred the other type of elastic. I don't know what you call it, like the fabric elastic. That was much easier to control for me. 21 is hook and eyes. So I do have some hook and eyes, but I've never used them. I think I tried sewing them once, but just gave up halfway through. They're so tiny, they're so fiddly, and I have hand tremors, so it's really, really difficult for me to sew them in. I could do it if I really wanted to. I'd probably do it better now. I don't see a need for it, to be honest. Number 22 is labels. So, you know, the labels that go in the back of your garments. So we see that in ready to wear. And people in the sewing world have got this obsession with putting labels in. I did have that obsession at one point and I did buy some nice labels from Kylie and the Machine, I think they were called. And I never really ended up sewing them in. I sewed 1 or 2 in, but I don't like how they feel. They feel really, really weird on my neck. You could put them elsewhere, but you're always going to feel them wherever they are. I'm sewing my clothes to wear for myself. No one else is going to see these clothes. Number 4 is thimbles. I don't do a lot of hand sewing. I do a bit if I need to, but for the most part I don't. and I've never ever used thimbles. So number 25 is retractable tape measures. So you saw in my sewing tools video that I have a long tape measure, an extra long one, and I love it. It's a fabric one. I used to have those retractable ones, and they're in like this little gadget, and it's got a button on it. You pull it out and it springs back and kills your hand. I didn't like them because they hurt my hand, but also they didn't feel very comfortable, and they didn't lay flat on my skin either. So I much prefer the one that I have. Number 26 is project books. Around about 2016, I bought a project book and it just never got used. I think I filled in one page. It's one of those books where you put the fabric you use, the pattern you use, any alterations, any comments, photos of your make, etc. And I thought at the time, oh, that'd be really good because it will help me to remember my makes. But obviously, I've got video for that, and I never ever filled it in. So number 27 is subscription boxes. I think I bought a fabric subscription box one time, but I never actually ever made up the garment or the fabric. And for myself, I'm against buying them because I think it is just excess. It encourages excess. We're buying something that we don't know what's in the contents. We're just handing over our money, saying send me something and I'll be happy with it. And then a lot of the time we're often not using it. If it works for you, then that is great. But for me, that's not something I want to subscribe to. And alongside that is remnant packs of fabric. Often on fabric websites, you will say, like you can buy a box of remnants, which is just end of bolts that they've had. It's just a way of them making some profit out of getting rid of the end of the bolts, or fabrics that are just sitting around too long. And it can be a good idea. I bought some once. Can't remember which company I bought them from. I thought it was going to be loads of dressmaking fabrics, and it wasn't. There were loads and loads of canvas fabrics and really weird ones that I just would not use. So I will not be going there again. Number 29 is beeswax. So I have a little round of beeswax that I bought because people told me you need it for sewing, hand sewing. And you run it through the thread and that stops the thread tangling up. But truth be told, I just never get round to using it. And it sat in my little hand sewing box almost completely unused for probably 5 or more years. Number 30 is a curve ruler. So that's not to say that I don't agree with buying them. I do. I have one. I use it. In fact, I have 2 and I use them. But I just don't see a need to buy any more. I don't see them breaking or anything like that, so there's not going to be a need to replace them. So number 31 is non-woven interfacing. Now I do plan on doing a video on interfacing at some point, but just quickly, I used to buy cheap interfacing and it was like a paper with glue on the other side. And I think that's better for like crafts and bags and boxes and things, but not really fabrics, because the fabric didn't flow as nicely as it could have. It seemed like it was a little bit stiff. And then I started buying fabric interfacing. But once I bought the woven ones, I would not look back. Number 32 is pattern weights. So if you've been watching me for any length of time, you know I have these 2 dice, which are pattern weights. And I bought them from a touristy place. They're supposed to be paperweights, I think, but they work perfectly for my needs. I've also got some washers. I've got probably about 15 washers. I don't tend to use them very often, but they're there if I do need them. And if I needed anything else, there's tins of beans in the cupboard. Number 33 is boning, another one of those things I just bought because I thought I should. And it stayed in my stash for the longest time. I did declutter it when I was decluttering because I've never used it. I bought the Gertie book years and years ago, and I think I was going to use it for that. But the Gertie book didn't go up to my size, so I never ended up doing any of the patterns. And I don't create patterns that require boning now anyway. I'm much more into comfort and relaxation. Press studs, or poppers as we call them in the UK. So they're those little metal things and we can put them on. They can be handy sometimes. I know in vintage sewing they'll often use them at the bottom of a shirt instead of a button because that's more comfortable. I don't think I've used them once in my sewing ever. Can I just say, if you are enjoying this video, do hit that subscribe button for more videos every Sunday evening. Number 35, pliers for rivets. So I actually have a rivet press, which I was going to declutter, but I didn't end up decluttering. And it's much easier. On those pliers, I find it really difficult to manage with my hand. I don't know, maybe I've got some RSI. RSI, is that what it's called? But I find them really difficult to press down, whereas a press, go, job done. Number 36 is Wonder Tape. Never used it. Don't know why people use it. Tell me down below. Why do you use it? Loop turners. I actually have 2 loop turners and I don't know where they've gone. But anytime I have used them, they just drive me bat crazy. Try and latch it on with the little latch at the end and it just never latches. Or it does, but it takes an age to do it, by which time my blood pressure is up here. 38, plastic elastic glides. I had to look up what these were called because I didn't know. It's a little plastic thing. You put some elastic in it and weave it through. But honestly, a safety pin does the job just as well. So number 39 is squared pattern paper. I bought this when I was first sewing because, you know, I needed something to draw my patterns on, but I just never used it, to be honest. I ended up just trying anything else. I would use gift paper, I would use parchment paper. I ended up buying a big roll from online that has lasted me years and years. And if that runs out at some point, it will, I will purchase another one. Number 40 is something I've just mentioned, and that is grease-proof paper. So as I was mentioning, I used it for drafting patterns or tracing patterns. It was good because you could see through the paper, but actually the pieces were never wide enough for me. So I'd have to sellotape them or glue them together. Parchment just did not want to take the glue or the sellotape. And I ended up putting pins through it to keep it together. It was really far from ideal. So number 41 is a ham. Some years ago I bought this one and I got it for £5 in a shop that was selling it off. Obviously they couldn't sell it. A couple of years ago I taught you guys how to make your own ham. Much prefer this one. It's made of hamster dust and you can see the video for that. So I won't ever be buying a ham again. Number 42 is a machine needle inserter. So I showed you in my sewing tools video that little metal inserter that really helps me. That's brilliant. But often when you get a sewing machine, it comes with like a plastic inserter that you put in and then you squeeze it. Oh, I don't know. I don't know how to do it, but it never ever worked for me. I couldn't get it to work. So I would never ever purchase one of those. So 43 is fabric glue. Do you use fabric glue? I don't. I did once buy a fabric glue stick because, you know, it was in the shop and it was there to buy. But I never really used it. I think I tried once or twice and I was just too scared of it gunking up my machine. I know they're not supposed to gunk up your machine, but I just feel we don't need to use glue in that way. Number 44 is shoulder pads. So some patterns call for shoulder pads. I've never come across a pattern that does because that's not the type of patterns that I make. I would make my own shoulder pads. They're really, really easy to make. We're on the home run. We're getting there. Number 45 is bias binding. When I was early in my sewing journey, I would buy bias binding all of the time, but it never worked well. I think sometimes they didn't bother to cut it on the bias, so it didn't have any stretch, and often it was a mix match with the actual fabric that I was using. I moved to making my own bias binding, and I do have a video showing you how to do that. So number 46, those thingies that hold the bobbin and the thread together. So years ago I used to get sewing magazines, loads and loads of them, and that's not on this list, but it should be. And it come with a free lot of these little things, and you put the bobbin on it and then insert it in the thread and it stays together, so you find it the next time you need it. And it's all good and well, but I never really used them. They just sat around for years and years and I ended up decluttering them. Number 47 is a thread burner. So I bought this, it's like a pen and it's got like a little electrical current at the end, and you put it on your threads, it burns your threads off, saves you cutting them. but it's one of those single-use gadgets that we just don't need. So number 48 is double needles. So you can use a double needle if you're sewing with knits, especially if you don't have a cover stitch. I don't have a cover stitch, but I think if I needed a double stitch, I would sew one row and then the other, because putting a double needle in is a faff that I don't need in my life. Number 49 is bobbins. I have got more bobbins than I can count. I went through a stage of buying loads because I never wanted to run out, and I didn't want to have to unwind threads to wind a new colour on. But these days I sew with less colour and I sew less in general, so I don't need so many bobbins. And 50, we're finally there. Number 50, the 50th thing that I won't buy anymore moving forward is anything to go in a stash. You know my feelings on a stash. I don't want a stash. It's overwhelming. It takes up too much space. I just want to work project by project. If you like this list, you might like this video where I go into some real deep, dark secrets about sewing.